Okay, we're going to start with being on a Macintosh or on a Windows system. And on a Macintosh to install VirtualBox, which is what we're going to start with here. Okay, I just have to do the install of VirtualBox, which is actually pretty simple. On Windows, you would have a thing that you would click on and walk through the installation of VirtualBox. Once you get VirtualBox done, we will do Ubuntu and install that. So this is the Macintosh version of installation, and there's an installer for VirtualBox. We're just going to set up a virtual system and do this on Linux the whole time. So we want to go OK here. And this is certainly not the only way. If you were on a Linux system, you'd be able to just do this with directly on the Linux system to install Postgres. Okay, I had to go tweak my security preferences to allow it to install, but it did install. And when it got done, I went over to Applications and ran it. On a Windows system, you'd go down and find VirtualBox and run it. Okay, once you get VirtualBox up and running, it looks something like this. And what we want to do is we're going to want to install a Linux system. And in the middle of the screen, you see where it says Optical Drive. My mouse is right on there underneath Storage. You want to click New and give this name, this machine, some sort of a name like UB001. Whatever name you like. If you start with UB, it's going to know that it's Ubuntu and 64-bit Linux. So that's usually what I do. I click Continue. And I need something that is not 4 megabytes. I need quite a bit more space to run a database. This is 5 gigabytes, which is probably enough for what we're trying to do. This is the amount of memory size. Click Continue. Create the virtual hard disk. That's the middle one, which is already pre-selected. And VHDI, which is the VirtualBox database or disk format. You can use these other disk formats if you need to port this machine to something else. I don't particularly need to for this class, so I'd pick just the defaults. And when I get to dynamically allocated, this means that this is the disk size that it creates when it is building the file system on your host hard drive. Now, you've got your host and your client. Your host is the machine that you type on. The client is the virtual machine. So this is the amount of size that it's going to allocate as it grows it on your host. Okay? And I want it dynamically allocated so it doesn't burn up a whole bunch of space that it doesn't use, because when I get over here, instead of 10 gigabytes, I'm going to tell it something like 40 gigabytes. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to take 40 gigabytes straight up. That means that this is going to be the size of the virtual volume, and it allocates it as it needs it. So I do create, and this is actually going to create the system. It's now sitting here powered off, named UB001. And the second thing I want to do is this optical drive. You see where I've highlighted the words optical drive? Click on that, and it actually has gone out and found in my downloads directory where I've already downloaded Ubuntu. Pick that as what's in the drive, and at this point I can actually start the system and do the install. So click the Start button, the green one up at the top, and my copy of VirtualBox is a little bit outdated, but it works the same way as far as I can tell on Windows with the current version, and it's going to sit here and run. Now, some of this stuff is going to take a while, so I am going to do a little bit of time travel and cut some pieces out of this video so that you don't have to watch a long video just watching things install. And that's about it for getting it started. Now, it's going to have to reboot a couple times. We're going to have to do some things to update the OS after we get it installed. Little notes. If you are working on a Macintosh, as I am, the VirtualBox system and Linux make some nasty assumptions about the mouse. And I'm using a one-button mouse right here, but when I actually go into Linux, I am going to have to plug in a 3-button PC mouse into my Mac system so that I can get it to work reasonably well. All right, we finally got to the point where it says install Ubuntu. And I don't want to just try Ubuntu, I want to install it. This is part of the stuff that's going to take a while. I'm working in English in US. If you pick some other language for some reason, it will be interesting. I certainly, use right-handed Dvorak US English for a keyboard frequently myself, but for this one, for our class, I'm just going to pick this. And if it does not default to download updates while installing Ubuntu, check that option. It will save you time later. Continue. And as soon as it actually starts, we're going to enter the land of instant, fast, forward time travel. So if you go to install yours and you go, oh no, it's taking forever. Okay, that's why. It's because I'm going to skip stuff. Erase disk and install Ubuntu. Remember, we just created a completely blank disk. So yes, we want to erase it so that it formats the disk. You need to click continue again. And I believe at this point is where it actually starts doing the install. Oh yeah, the time zone. Okay, if you want a different time zone, choose wisely. Put in a username, but do not put blanks in your username. May I repeat that one? Postgres does not like on Linux blanks in your username. So put in your name, and then put in, you can use that. I'm going to use UB001 so that the computer's name is the same as what I told it in VirtualBox, and a username without blanks. And then it's complaining I have a weak password. Yeah, that's okay. Continue. Now, in the in-class lecture, we're going to spend some time talking about the different accounts, but I want to walk through this so that you can see how the install goes. It says it's almost finished copying files. That's actually not true. We're going to click back to this when it's done copying files, about 10 minutes from now. Okay, after a little bit of time travel, it finally says installation complete. Restart now. You want to do this. You want to click the Restart Now button, and that will reboot the system underneath your new Ubuntu OS. And when it says press enter, if you've removed the disk, it will automatically remove the disk from the virtual disk from the drive when you do that. So just hit enter, and it should be off and running. Now, this is a bare Linux system. There are some things that we're going to need to do to it. And we also have to create some accounts. Part of the magic of this is that on a Unix system, we have multiple accounts, and Postgres runs in its own account, which is different than your user account, and we're going to set it up so that you can access Postgres from your user account. We also want to set up so that you can, I'm going to click skip here because I really don't want any of these things. We're also going to set up so that you can copy machines from your host to your Ubuntu system and back using SSH. And that way you can get files for the class onto the system, you can get your homework off the system. This is not the only way to copy it, but this is one way that's effective. There are a bunch of things installed on here like LibreOffice Writer that I will probably, for my own use, delete from the system and just get rid of, because I really am not using those in the server context. Rhythmbox, I really don't play music on my virtual machines, and email. I probably will leave a browser on there so that if I'm doing some sort of search, I can use the browser to search for information, find it, cut and paste it. Now, right now, these two do not have cut and paste connected to each other, my host and my client OS. You can set that up so it works in between the two. I generally don't. It just doesn't seem to serve much use to me. Now, you'll notice that the software updater has come up and said install now. You can do this from the command line, but you want to click install now and update the system. It's going to ask you for a password when it does that and get the system updated. Again, we're going to do time travel. Okay, it finally finished installing updates, I think. Let's go bring up a terminal and see if we can find this. We can get the terminal over here on the left-hand bar on the toolbar, but we just need to get a terminal so we can get this system bootstrapped. Looks like this little grayer thing right here. And that looks like the correct thing. You'll also notice that we are in a tiny little window. We're also going to fix that before we get done here. So we've got a bunch of steps we got to fix, but one thing at a time we can get through this. Apt-get update. And if you get this kind of a thing, that means that it is in fact not running the other done running the other program that's doing updates. I thought I saw a thing that indicated that it was done, but it's not. You just have to wait for it to finish updating. And finally, about 3 minutes later, I see that it has finally popped up with this, where it's asking me to restart, because whenever it updates and installs a new operating system, it wants to restart. And we do want to do that, so we get a reboot at this point. And let the system reboot once, and as soon as it comes back, we will actually verify that we've gotten current updates done and that it is ready to go. Now, we're going to install a database, but we have to build accounts. And in the process of building those accounts, we're going to have multiple accounts that we're dealing with. Most of you who have not worked on a Linux system are not going to be familiar with this. I am going to talk about accounts and how they interact in lecture. And now when you get terminal over here, what I do is with a 3-button mouse, which I am just attaching to the computer. I said you had to have one if you're on a Unix system, and here I am having to plug in a 3-button mouse. But with a 3-button mouse, I can right-click on terminal, and I can say add to favorites. Okay, that'll put it over here on the side, and there's some that I'm going to remove from favorites. This doesn't delete the software, I'm just getting it out of my way for the moment because I'm definitely not using those programs. This will have things so that it's a little bit more condensed and I can find stuff. Alrighty. Now, if you do pwd, that gives you your path on the system. That's going to be important when you copy stuff in and out. As in with SSH copying from your host to this system, you're going to have to say copy to this account on this system at this path. And you need to know that path so you can copy it in. You're going to see me repeatedly forget that path and end up copying to /temp, then logging into this system and then moving the file. I do that all the time. But yes, you kind of need to know where that is on the system. Now, the set of accounts that we have right now is only the one that I've created for my initial login. The other account that we have is if we cat /etc password, okay, you'll see there are a slew of accounts. This one is the first user account. We're going to create one for Postgres. You'll notice that somewhere in here there is this root account, which has all the privileges for doing everything. And right after root, it has an X, which means that generally speaking, you can never log into that account. The way you get to that account is you do sudo, and I'm just going to run some command that's going to run as root, but the command that I'm going to run is a command shell. Now, this is one of those ones, and you have to enter your password here, that will just make system administrators go berserk when you do this. I'm thrilled to make them a little bit crazier in life, but for lots of stuff that I do when I'm doing installs, instead of doing sudo in front of each command one at a time so that they can log all the commands, I'm just going to do sudo bash, bring up a shell as root, and now I can do a whole bunch of stuff as root to fix up this system and get it to the point where I need to get it configured. To exit back from this shell back to your shell, you just do Control-D, and it puts you back logged in as you. Now, the next time you do sudo, if it's within a few minutes, it won't prompt you for a password. If you do who am I, this is a good command to know. It doesn't say anything. That's interesting. Okay. But if you do who am I when you're sudoed without spaces, it says root. And that tells you what account you're effectively at. Now later when we have a Postgres account, we can do who am I and it'll say what the Postgres account is. Again, if I do Control-D and I do who am I, it'll say my login account.